Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to the newest episode of Super Kaiju Binge, uh, where we will be discussing, I think now admittedly one of my least favorite Godzilla movies. Though unfortunately it's kind of a pivotal and important moment in the Godzilla series. Today we will be discussing the only time that Toho ever released two Godzilla movies in 1 year. 1964's Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster. So Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster, like I said, is kind of an important moment in the Godzilla franchise for mainly two reasons. Kind of three, but mainly two. The kind of third one is that this is the one that really, really, truly cemented the tone and formula kind of for the rest of the Showa Godzilla series. But one, this was where Godzilla stopped being the bad guy and started becoming more of the good guy. Though if anyone was to say this is his first time being a good guy, this is not true. I would definitely say that Godzilla becomes an anti-hero in this film. He's not specifically just destroying the world for the sake of destroying it, but he's still not 100% a goody-goody two-shoes superhero. This will not happen until the 1970s, so we still have a way to go. And, of course, this was the first film to introduce Godzilla's arch nemesis, King Ghidorah. So I'm just going to get this out of the way. I've made it very, very, very clear I'm not the biggest fan of King Ghidorah. I've never really thought, until Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019, King Ghidorah was truly done justice in any of his film appearances. He never really came close to reaching the peak level of awesomeness that they're always trying to market and build him up for. It just never worked until Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019. But we'll talk about that when we get to that film. But yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of King Ghidorah. And just in general, I'm really not the biggest fan of this movie. This movie's got quite a few fans in the Godzilla fan base. Like, I think Andres Perez even once said himself that I believe this was his favorite Godzilla movie. And I'm just left scratching my head. If you have nostalgia for this movie, then that's all well and good. But I've even heard some people say they think Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster is better than Mothra versus Godzilla. And having now actually watched these movies back to back, I just really have to ask, why? Why? I just don't get it. This may kind of set the tone for what my opinion is going to be for this film, maybe intentionally or unintentionally. But yeah, I'm just not the biggest fan of this movie. It's not a bad film by any means. I just don't think it's as good as everyone else says that it is. It's just an okay movie. Again, it's not bad, but it's just, especially coming off the awesomeness that is Mothra versus Godzilla, it just feels like a downgrade. Kind of like Gamera versus Berrigan and Gamera versus Gauss, though I actually think this may be a little bit worse. But I don't know. So with all that being said, let's get into the plot of Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. I will be talking about the Japanese version of this movie, and this is actually the very, very first time that I've ever watched the Japanese cut of Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Both cuts are pretty much the same, despite the fact the American cut is, I think, like 10 minutes shorter. But I think it's just like a Mothra situation where the Japanese cut is an hour and 40 and the American cut is an hour and 30. I think they just shaved some scenes short throughout the film, and they just shaved out 10 minutes. Though I don't think it's 100% 10 minutes. I think it's more like 8 in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. But I think they just shaved some scenes short. Yeah, like Kaiju Network says, Invasion of the Astro Monster is way, way better. I'm actually The next couple movies on Super Kaiju Binge, I'm really excited to get to, but we gotta get through this one. Oh, actually, I'm looking at it right here. The American version is 84 minutes long, and the Japanese version is almost 93 minutes. So yeah, there's like 8 or 9 minutes shaved out of this movie. And again, there's nothing too drastic. The movie stories are pretty much the same. I just think there were some scenes that were shaved short throughout the film. So there's not a huge difference, but I still will be referring to the Japanese cut, just because that's the more complete version. So let's get into it. Reporter Naoko Shindo attends a communication session with the UFO Society for her television program. After deeming the session a failure due to Naoko's skepticism, a meteor shower descends on Japan, with the largest crashing in Mount Kurodake. Shindo, a police detective and Naoko's brother, is assigned to guard Princess Salno of Selgina from a political assassination during an unannounced visit to Japan. Oh, and another thing that this movie is a first for, this is the very first time the Godzilla series has aliens in it. They're never seen in the film, and they're also surprisingly not the villains. But this is the very first time aliens are ever introduced in the Godzilla series. Because en route to Japan, an alien entity leads Salno to jump from her plane before it unexpectedly explodes. Professor Miura, once again played by Hiroshi Koizumi from it's Professor Mirai. There's a typo here. Once again played by Hiroshi Koizumi, returning from Mothra vs. Godzilla, leads a research team to Mount Kurodake to investigate the large meteor, where they discover that it'll randomly emit magnetic waves. Naoko is sent to investigate a prophetess claiming to be from Venus, who predicts that Rodin will emerge from Mount Aso. The prophetess catches the attention of both Shindo and Salno's uncle, who both believed her to be dead. Responsible for the assassination plot, Salno's uncle sends the assassin Malnus, played by Hisaya Ito, to kill her, and arrives in Japan after Rodin awakens. After participating in a TV program, the Shobi gene, played for the final time by the Peanuts, of course being Mothra's twin fairies, prepare to depart for home, but are warned by the prophetess to not sail. Naoko takes the prophetess to a hotel to interview her and discover that the Shobi gene had followed them, heeding the prophetess's warning before Godzilla sunk their ship. After confirming that the prophetess is indeed Salno, Shindo finds her at the hotel and saves her from Malnus. They evacuate after Godzilla and Rodin converge on the city and battle throughout the countryside. Yet this being another first time for the Godzilla series, I think it may just be the only time, where we don't get a scene where any of the monsters fight the military. There's no military roundup scenes in this movie whatsoever. Which again, I think may be the only time in the entire Godzilla franchise where there is nothing of the sort. After Dr. Tsukamoto, played by Takashi Shimura, I think also for the final time in the Godzilla franchise, being a psychiatrist, determines the prophetess to be a normal human. She predicts the arrival of King Ghidorah, a monster that destroyed her home on Venus. Mirai and his team witness the meteor explode, which is a really awesome scene, unleashing the golden three-headed space dragon Ghidorah, who proceeds to attack Matsumoto City. The authorities plead with the Shobi gene to summon Mothra for help, but they warn that Mothra alone would not be enough to defeat Ghidorah, and their only hope would be for Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra to join forces to defeat Ghidorah. Under hypnosis, the prophetess reveals that some Venusians escaped to Earth from Ghidorah and assimilated with humans, resulting in them losing their abilities, with the exception of precognition. After Malnus overhears Tsukamoto recommend shock therapy, he increases the voltage, knowing it will immediately kill her with 5,000 volts coursing through her skull, but fails after the power lines are destroyed by rampaging Godzilla and Rodan, very conveniently. After thwarting off Malnus and his crew with the help of Professor Mirai, Shindo evacuates to the mountains with the prophetess Tsukamoto, Naoko, Mirai, and the Shobijin. Mothra attempts to convince Godzilla and Rodan after a admittedly pretty amusing scene where Mothra thwarts Godzilla and Rodan's fight by spraying them in the face with her silk, and we get to see both Rodan and Godzilla laugh for the very first time in the franchise. But she attempts to convince the two to set aside their differences to save the planet, and both refuse due to years of harassment from humans. After seeing Mothra attempt to battle Ghidorah on her own, Godzilla and Rodan rush to her aid. The prophetess wanders off and regains her memories after Malnus nearly kills her by grazing a bullet grazing her head with a bullet. Shindo protects her in time, and Malnus falls to his death. After seeing Mothra attempt to battle Ghidorah on her own, Godzilla and Rodan rush to her aid, which is easily the best part of the film. I think I already said that. The three monsters overwhelm Ghidorah and force him to flee into outer space. Prior to departing for home, Princess Salno reveals to Shindo she doesn't recall her recent memories as the prophetess, but she does remember all three occasions when Shindo saved her life, and thanks him and Naoko for their help. Godzilla and Rodan watch on as Mothra journeys back home with the Shobijin, who bid farewell to all, thus ending the film. So, how about this plot? Again, coming off of Mothra versus Godzilla, I really don't think this movie's plot lives up to that film, but trying to look at it as its own thing, I still don't think it's as epic as a lot of people make it out to be, and as a lot of the marketing really tried to build this movie up as one big epic event. It's just okay. It's not bad. It's not terrible. I can see that they were trying to make the movie a bit more complex by having all these different plot threads going on, but the plot ended up just feeling really messy and especially in the first half. You have the assassination plot. You have Shindo and his sister trying to just get good at their careers and move along in their life. And then you have the resurrection of all these monsters and this big prophecy going on. It just makes the plot feel very, very busy, and it feels a little too busy. Toward the second half of the movie, that's where the movie flows along a bit better. That's when the monsters are actually around doing stuff. You have Godzilla going around his own thing. You have Rodan popping up a couple times before he plays a big role in the final act. And then you see all this shit with Mothra going on. And then, despite this movie being called Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, of all four of these monsters, I can't talk. What the fuck? Of all four of this movie's monsters, Ghidorah definitely has the least amount of screen time of all of them. This is a near 93-minute long film, and I'd be willing to say that he has maybe 6 or 7 minutes of screen time in the whole thing. He pops up a little over an hour into the film. He pops up 2 or 3 times very quickly, going on a rampage throughout Japan, and then he shows up for the final battle. I think that's pretty fucking sad. We're a movie that's nearly 93 minutes long and is called Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster himself is barely in his own fucking movie. What the fuck? And it also unfortunately suffers a little bit from Sinister 2 syndrome, where it feels like there's two different movies going on at the same time. That's all I'm going to say about that, because that is one of my problems with this movie. But overall, this movie's story, it's very busy, but that's a bad thing for all the wrong reasons. Because they're trying to juggle all of these different storylines and all this shit going on that they're trying to make this movie bigger and more epic. It just ends up feeling like a mess. And only at the last half hour or so or not even that, like the last 20 minutes or so, does the movie come together well, and it's actually entertaining. So with that being said, let me get into my pros and cons of Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. I have 5 pros. Pro number 1 is Shindo. Oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. Hang on. Oh, maybe. No, hang on. I have 6 pros. So yeah, Shindo. I like Shindo quite a lot. He's played by Yosuke Natsuki. I believe this may have been his only lead character in a Godzilla movie, but I like him. I like him quite a bit. He's kind of a first for this series as well. He's a police officer. And I believe, well, this wasn't the first time we've seen police officers as characters in Ishiro Honda movies, because we had the H-Man, and then this year too we had Dogora. But in the Godzilla series, this was the very first time that we had a police officer as the main character. And I like him. He's a likable protagonist. He's not a special police officer. Like, he's not a lieutenant. He's not a sergeant. He's not a... I don't even think he's a detective. I think he's just I think he's just slightly above being a street... Oh, no, he is a detective. I just said that. But if I get the sense that he's a new detective, like he's only been in this position for maybe a few months. And he's just trying to be good at his job, and he's trying his damnedest to do his duty and protect Princess Salno. And I find him to be a likable guy. He's smart. He's quick on his feet, knows how to think on his feet. He knows when to pull a gun when shit's going down. And he's also a good bodyguard. So not much to say about him. He's a very simple character, but he's a likable character as well. And he's really the only character in this movie that you grow attached to at all. The rest of the human cast, with exception of one, talk about her, they're not bad per se. They're just a typical Godzilla cast at this point. Sadly, Hiroshi Koizumi isn't utilized nearly as much as the plot makes him out to be. He really only has... Well, he has quite a few scenes, but they're all very brief. And even then, I think he has maybe 10 or 12 minutes of screen time. His best scene is near the end, where he helps Shindo save Princess Salno at the psychiatrist's office, where he actually like knocks out a thug with a wrench and picks up his gun and starts shooting at people. That's probably his best scene, but he's just not as awesome as he was in Mothra vs. Godzilla. But this will lead me to my next pro, and that's this film's continuity. This is one of very few times in the Godzilla Showa series, that is, where they make explicit use and they acknowledge the fact that this does take place right after the events of Mothra vs. Godzilla. And this establishes the same kind of tone. And I don't even think this movie's events take place maybe 3 months after the events of Mothra vs. Godzilla. Maybe 4 or 5, because there's a bit of time where the Peanuts stayed in Japan and they built up a fan base. and they had a public image and a public name created for themselves in Japan. So maybe 4 or 5 months after the events of Mothra versus Godzilla. But I like that the fact that these movies still do they feel like two parts of the same movie. And it's nice when the Godzilla series takes advantage of that continuity, which makes things feel very consistent, which is nice. Pro number 3 is the music score. Akira Ifukube did once again return to do the score for Ghidorah Three-Headed Monster. It ultimately sounds very similar to Mothra vs. Godzilla, and unfortunately, it's not quite as awesome as it is in Mothra vs. Godzilla, but that's only because a lot of these music cues were used in Mothra vs. Godzilla, and they're just recycled from that. They're tweaked somewhat slightly to make it sound a little bit different. And there is a new Mothra song that was created for this film, which I actually don't really care for. I think it's a little bit too long. But overall, the music score is good. It's not as good as Mothra vs. Godzilla, but that's just simply due to the fact that both of these movies were made and released in the same year. So I'm guessing that Akira Ifukube was just rushed, which I'll talk about when I get to my cons, but I do think this movie feels a little bit rushed. But yeah, the score is good. It's Ifukube. Ifukube is never bad. It's just not as good as the previous film. Pro number 4 is the special effects. The special effects are still, once again, very, very consistent. I really would not be surprised if Mothra vs. Godzilla and Ghidorah Three-Headed Monster were shot back to back. Like they had both these movies planned in mind, but they just put most of their focus in Mothra vs. Godzilla. And then this was just the second half of that double feature. But the special effects still are very, very consistent. The suits look great, except for one. But Godzilla's suit looks fine. It has a slightly different head, but it has the same body as the Mosugoji suit. The Mothra puppet that they have, I think, is a bit different from the previous film. It has red eyes instead of blue eyes, but it still moves and looks fine. The silk effects look great. The wire works look really good. King Ghidorah himself, not a fan of Ghidorah, but his first appearance, he does look really cool. The suit is well made. It's well constructed. It's decently balanced. The wire works for Ghidorah's head, or his heads, are fine. They're a little bit prototypey and they're a little bit stiff, but this was the first time that they ever had a monster that was this complex. So their first attempt is fine for what it is. And he also was played by King Kong's Hirose Shoichi Solomon Hirose. I believe this was his final time playing a monster in a kaiju film, because I think Ghidorah was played by somebody else in the next movie. But yeah, the effects are great. The miniatures are well done. The explosions look great. Ghidorah's gravity beams look really cool. The wind effects for when Ghidorah is flying look really good. Overall, the special effects are really, really good. They're not quite as impressive, and they're not quite as awesome in Mothra vs. Godzilla. But here, they're also a bit more intricate because we have a much more complicated monster on display, and we have 4 monsters instead of 2. So that may just counteract that. So the effects are good, but they're not as fun to watch as they were in Mothra vs. Godzilla. So kind of a strange two-way street there. Pro number 5 is the final monster battle. There's really, well, no, there's 2. Godzilla's fight with Rodin is okay, except for the puppets that they use for both Godzilla and Rodin looks fine-ish, because I still hate Rodin's design, but Rodin's puppet looks fine, but Godzilla's puppet looks awful. It looks really stiff, and it looks like a hand or a sock puppet that they use. It doesn't look very good. It looks really plasticky, and it looks very disproportionate to the Godzilla suit. But Godzilla's fight with Rodan is fine. It's kind of funny. It's entertaining. Like Godzilla's dick drop, where Rodan lifts Godzilla up in the air and he drops him onto um onto an electrical tower, crotch first. As James Rolfe calls it, watch, it's the dick drop. Oh, that's gotta hurt. So yeah, that was kind of funny. It's a bit more of a goofy monster battle, especially at the end of it. They're just playing volleyball with a boulder, but it's still fun to watch. But the final monster fight with Godzilla, Mothra, and Rodan versus King Ghidorah is a lot of fun to watch. It's great to see that because of the monster characterization that I'll get to in just a minute, that we can see the three monsters act a bit more human-like and show coordination and leadership skills and also tactics in taking down Ghidorah. And it's also a bit interesting because Godzilla doesn't use his atomic breath very much. Actually, against Ghidorah, he doesn't use it at all. And that'll lead me to another issue I have with the effects, is that Godzilla's atomic breath looks like shit in this movie. They use just the mist from the puppet effects a lot in this film, which is odd. There's really only one scene where they use an optically animated Godzilla atomic breath, and it's when Godzilla destroys the ship earlier in the film. But other than that, it's Godzilla just spraying water from his mouth as his atomic breath, and it looks like shit. I've never liked that effect. But yeah, Godzilla fights Ghidorah very tooth and nail, and he throws a lot of boulders in this movie, which is kind of cool to showcase that Godzilla is willing to use his surroundings to attack his foes. But still, it's a little disappointing that Godzilla doesn't use his atomic breath very much. But the next movie will rectify that. So the final monster fight is entertaining, and it's also a little cute, I will admit, to see Rodan and Mothra work together to lasso up Ghidorah. And it's also impressive to see that Godzilla was able to just, like, wrestler style toss Ghidorah into the ocean and send him packing after all three of his heads were wrapped up by Mothra. So that was pretty cool. And that's all the good stuff I have to say about this movie. Let's move on to the cons. Con number one is, like I said, this movie does have Sinister 2 syndrome. And I have 7 cons for this film. How I think this movie has Sinister 2 syndrome is, like I said, you have the assassination plot line in the first act of the movie, and then you have all the monster movie stuff in the second half of the movie. It once again kind of does feel like Ishiro Honda may have wanted to just make 2 movies, but Tomoyuki Tanaka said, make it a Godzilla movie. This isn't as bad as a lot of other monster movies or sci-fi movies that Ishiro Honda made, where it's plain as day, especially with Dogora, that Ishiro Honda wanted to make a crime drama film, but they were tried to crowbar it into being a monster movie. This isn't as bad, but it still does kind of stick out like a sore thumb. And to me, it just makes me feel like this feels like 2 different movies crowbarred into one. Because you have the assassination plot line, you have the Venus plot line, and then you have all the stuff with the monsters. At the end, they kind of do flow together in an okay manner. It's not like other movies that have Sinister 2 syndrome, where they try to slam them together at the very end and it just doesn't work. So this movie does it a bit better than most, but still, when I watch this movie, I definitely do get the feeling like Ishiro Honda wanted to make a crime drama assassination film, but then Tomoyuki Tanaka says, make it a Godzilla movie. Con number 2 is that, in my opinion, the first 2 acts of this movie just kind of go nowhere. They just meander along until the monsters show up about 40 minutes in, and that's when the movie starts to pick up and get interesting. There's really no through line or forward momentum in the first 40 minutes of this movie, in my opinion. It's just people doing everyday average things. Just one happens to be a police officer, One happens to be an investigative journalist. And it's well written, but it's just not that engaging, especially coming off of Mothra versus Godzilla, where every single scene felt integral to the plot. A lot of stuff in the beginning just doesn't feel that integral to the plot and doesn't feel like a Ghidorah, the three-headed monster movie. And once the monsters show up, that's when the movie starts to get more entertaining, and that's when it starts to get more lively. And that's also when the human stuff starts to tie more into the human stuff better. But yeah, the first 40 minutes of this movie, in my opinion, just kind of wander aimlessly, in my opinion. Con number 3 is the assassination plot. They kind of just really try to shove this down your throat, that they really wanted this to be the main thing that was the driving force for the film. And at times, whenever they addressed it, it just kind of felt like it sticks out like a sore thumb. At least with the Venusian stuff, that ties into Ghidorah's origin, because they explain that Ghidorah had destroyed Venus in just 3 days. That's what Ghidorah is that he's just a planet destroyer. He goes from planet to planet to planet and just destroys them. And that's why Venus looks the way that it looks, because Ghidorah destroyed it in 3 days. That stuff is fine, but then comes along the assassination plot line, and it just feels like it comes out of nowhere. Like, just so happens that the Venusians decided to possess this princess that's trying to be assassinated. And this leads me into my next con, is that the main assassin character, he's not a very intimidating villain. He barely like emotes in his face, which I guess that may have been the point, to just make him be a cold-blooded killer. But he just comes off really bland. His acting feels very stiff and wooden, and a bit forced. And his character is not. His character is also not very smart either, because he literally tries to kill this chick in the middle of a giant monster fight. He's nearly killed in the process of his car getting caught in an avalanche due to a giant monster fight, and he still grabs a gun and he's still trying to kill this chick. I mean, on one hand, I admire the dude's dedication, but the other part of me is just thinking, dude, just wait. This is not the time nor the place to get your angry hate women boner taken care of. Just, dude, wait. Be sadistic at a later point and use the knife you used to kill her dad to slit her throat. Just wait. Or you don't even have to lift a finger, and because she's so fucking stupid, just let the monsters kill her, because she's waiting in the middle of a giant monster fight. This will lead me into my next problem. The Venusian woman is a fucking moron. Really reminds me of Yuri from GMK, which, oh God, I don't even want to talk about that woman. But she's a moron. She keeps putting herself in danger. What is up with giant monster movies and their females putting themselves in danger? Like, what the fuck? Chicken King Kong versus Godzilla did this as well. She's very, very preachy, and she's a very one-note performance, which there's moments when it works, and it's kind of a creepy scene where she's under hypnosis and she reveals that she's possessed by a Venusian, and like she reveals what happened to the Venusians after Venus was destroyed. But especially in the third act, the whole reason why Shindo had to save her and why he got shot in the arm was because she wandered off and put herself in the middle of a giant monster fight. And this dumb-ass motherfucker assassin was so dedicated to be sadistic and kill her that he wandered in the middle of a giant monster fight to kill her. All because of her. Moron. Let's see. Con number 6 is, god damn, I hate Rodin's design in this movie. I really, really fucking hate it. I don't like his color scheme. I don't like the shape of his wings. They're really like almost bat-like in appearance, which is fine when Rodin is like standing, because you could just say he's like bending his wings to make his balance a bit better. But even when he's flying, his wings look really bulbous, like at where his claws are supposed to be. They look really bulbous, which would be counterproductive with him being a flying monster, because their wings have to be thin in order for them to cut through the air. But because they're so big and bulbous and bulky, it just doesn't look aesthetically presentable. But my main issue with Rodin's design is his color. He's like this dark brownish color, so he really blends with Godzilla when the two are fighting. And his damn head, even my wife agrees, Rodin looks like a fucking pigeon in this movie. I fucking loathe Rodin's design in this movie. He looks like a pigeon. He's supposed to look like a pterodactyl, not a fucking mutant pigeon chicken bullshit. I like how expressive he is, because they gave this... did I talk about that? Oh, shit. I never talked about... Pro number 6, excuse me, I'll get back to that in just a minute, but pro number 6 is the monster characterization in this movie is top-notch. Ishiro Honda apparently famously did not like the incorporation of more human-like characteristics in monsters, but if you're going to have a long-running franchise, there's only so far that you can take the indestructible powerhouse monster personality. You got to have a little bit of edge to these characters, and it's not full-on goofiness that the Godzilla series will somewhat devolve into later in the franchise. They just give them more character, and really there's nothing wrong with that. There's more to them, and that this is what makes these monsters stand out from the typical 50s American giant B-movie atomic monsters. They're just angry, rampaging animals in those movies. Here, they actually have depth and character to them, and they have personalities, which makes them stand out even more amongst from the crowd. So I like that Rodin is kind of has a sick sense of humor, and Godzilla is just at first kind of a bumbling badass, but he still has more depth to him, and he realizes that, oh yeah, I live on this planet too, so maybe I should help in destroying Ghidorah. And Rodin realizes that as well. But I like that Rodin's puppet is more expressive to showcase his more kind of a sick, twisted sense of humor and a sick and twisted personality. But still, it's just the design that kills it. He looks like a pigeon or a chicken, and it really sticks out like a sore thumb, and it fucking sucks that this is the design that they use for the rest of the Showa series. Ugh, I hate it. And this will lead me into con number 7 is King Ghidorah. Again, he has maybe 6 or 7 minutes of screen time in his own movie, at the very most 8. Now, Mechagodzilla doesn't have very much screen time in the first Mechagodzilla movie, but when he's on screen, he has a great buildup, he has a great sense of threat, he has a great presence, and he has a great personality, despite being a robot. And he's only on screen for maybe 8 to 10 minutes. Here, Ghidorah doesn't have any of that. The only thing that makes him a threat is the fact that he's so big, has 3 heads, and spits lightning all over the place. Other than that, Ghidorah doesn't have a personality, doesn't have a sense of threat, doesn't have any buildup. His reveal is great. That looks great. There's tons of shit ton of sparks and fire and smoke and a big giant explosion and great optically animated flames that morph Ghidorah into his form. But it looks great, but he just doesn't have a good buildup, doesn't have a good presence. And I just never understood why Ghidorah went on to become Godzilla's most, like his biggest arch rival. Is it because he's twice as tall as Godzilla? Because it's confirmed that Showa Godzilla is 50 meters in height. Showa Ghidorah is 100 meters in height, making him the largest Showa Godzilla monster of the whole series. Is it because he's twice as large? Because I've never considered Ghidorah to be Godzilla's arch rival. I consider that to be Mechagodzilla. Because who is not your greatest rival if not yourself? That's why I consider Venom to be Spider-Man's ultimate rival. And that's why I consider Bane to be Batman's ultimate rival. Bane is kind of like an anti-Batman. But yeah, I just don't like Ghidorah. There's really not much to say about Ghidorah because he has such little screen time in his own fucking movie. But yeah, there's just not much to say about Ghidorah. He's not that cool. He's not as intimidating as the filmmakers make him out to be. And they barely talk about him until when he lands in the city that's near Mothra, Godzilla, and Rodin. So really, that's all I have to say about Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Apologies if this review seemed a little jumbled, but I just don't have much to say about this movie. It's not one of my favorite Godzilla movies. I don't find myself returning to this movie very often. It has some good moments, and of course, when the monsters are doing their own thing in the last half hour or so of the film, that's when the movie gets entertaining. But the assassination feels forced. It feels like two movies going on at the same time. The prophetess is a moron. I don't like Ghidorah, and I hate Rodin's design. So really, I would probably have to say this has got to be one of my least favorite Godzilla movies upon closer scrutiny. So I will be giving this movie a 5 out of 10. It doesn't live up to Godzilla or to Mothra versus Godzilla. It's not one of my favorite Godzilla movies. It does feel a little bit rushed, not as much as other movies in the kaiju genre. But it just goes to show that if you can release 2 Godzilla movies in a year, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should. This isn't a bad film by any means, but I wouldn't say it's a great one. But I still do recommend it for checking it out because of how important it is to Godzilla, the Godzilla series as a whole, and for Godzilla himself, because this is when Godzilla kind of stopped becoming a bad guy and morphed into an anti-hero and later a superhero. So it is cool for that. But overall, I'm just not a big fan. So 5 out of 10 is what I give this film. Post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. And share this video with your friends. And look forward to the next episode where I talk about a vastly superior Godzilla movie and a King Ghidorah movie, where we talk about 1965's Invasion of the Astro Monster. I hope you all join me for that. And as always, go out and if you see a giant monster battle, don't wade into it, you fucking idiot. And I will see you guys in the next video.